I have with me Hugh de Kretser, who is the Director of the Human Rights Law Centre. Thanks for joining us, Hugh.
My pleasure.
Well, what is the Human Rights Law Centre and how did you get the gig?
Yeah, so Human Rights Law Centre is a relatively new organisation. We're formed in 2006 and we exist to protect and promote human rights in Australia and in Australian activities overseas. And unlike most community legal centres that do a high volume of small matters, we do a low volume of large matters focused on systemic change. So we litigate in the higher courts, we combine that litigation, legal action with advocacy to try and change the law, to change policies, to have systemic impact for the benefit of vulnerable Australians.
Well, simple question, why are human rights so important?
Well, human rights are the basic fundamental guarantees around issues like freedom, equality, respect and dignity. So they protect everyone in the world. Obviously some people who are more vulnerable need greater protection from human rights guarantees, and typically those guarantees are split into civil and political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. So examples of those in the civil political space: freedom of speech, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom from discrimination, the right to life; in economic, social and cultural rights, the right to housing, health, education, right to food.
Okay, so often when people think of human rights, they think of international tribunals, they think of Jeffrey Robertson, Amal Clooney, they think of a whole range of war crimes, atrocities. Why do we need a Human Rights Law Centre here in Victoria?
Yeah, sure. So there's, on the spectrum of human rights violations in the world, you've got the Congo, Syria, North Korea. They're obviously the most acute world problems, but we still have problems in Australia. Australia's got a pretty good track record on protecting human rights, but that doesn't apply equally to everyone. You look across Australia's history and issues like the stolen generation, the White Australia policy, entrenched discrimination against women and migrants. These are the kind of examples of where Australia's failed in terms of protecting human rights. In the modern context, we've still got really extreme examples of human rights violations, particularly for Indigenous Australians, for asylum seekers, those locked up in offshore detention centres in Nauru and Manus Island, but also the ongoing discrimination against women, family violence, disability discrimination. Marriage equality is an issue for lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex and transgender Australians. So these are the kind of issues that we work on as an Australian-based Human Rights Law Centre.
And what sort of skills do you need to be a human rights lawyer?
I think a passion for justice as a starting point. So a lot of law students start their studies with that real passion for changing the world, for improving the world. And some of us are fortunate enough to carry that into a career, and there's lots of ways you can do that, but for me it's been for the past 11 years working in community legal centres, and prior to that doing pro bono work and some volunteering. And at university I was obviously interested in human rights law, international law, and I've been able to forge a career out of that, but a determination for change, human skills. So working in community legal centres can be frustrating. I used to work in a corporate law firm, and in one sense it's almost clinical because your clients are well educated, they understand the law. You work in a community legal centre and you've got people dealing with intense personal issues, trauma, tragedy. So it's not just the law, it's also those social skills about being able to work with people, build that trust and rapport, because they're revealing really personal details to you, and you're working in a journey with them to try and get justice for them. So you have to have patience, you have to have a long-term vision, you have to have the passion for justice, and you have to be a good lawyer.
Okay, and to wrap it up, if you had one piece of advice for those students watching this who are thinking about their career path, thinking about maybe going to the corporate sector, thinking about perhaps the human rights area, what would that one piece of advice be?
Get involved. Whether or not you forge a career out of it or whether you do it as a volunteer exercise on the side of your other career, the key to it is getting involved, building your experience, building your networks, making that change, using your education, your privilege for the benefit of those who are vulnerable. And if everyone does that, Australia will be a better place.
Well, there you go, students. There's the advice. Get involved. You really have a duty to make Australia a better place.